Hi, everybody. This is Saad. Yesterday, I put out a few polls, and I'd like to report the final results of those polls. But before I do that, I had posted also a tweet yesterday where I wrote, "The Organization of Islamic Cooperation is made up of 56 countries and the noble land of peaceful Palestine. How did each of these countries, which once had zero Islam, become Islamic? I presume it was largely driven by the Socratic method. I've often heard that Islamic brutal military conquests were actually rooted in peaceful Socratic brutal dialoguing." So basically, the Socratic method. Uh, and so later I put up another tweet that said the following: North Africa and the Middle East were once home to indigenous cultures that were non Islamic, zero Islam. They all eventually became nearly 100% Islamic. Does anyone know how that noble transformation took place? And Elon Musk wrote, "Socratic debate?" Question mark. I love this guy. I love this guy. In any case, so satire, sarcasm, and humor, as I've explained before, is the way that you oftentimes cut through mounds of bullshit. Uh, I put up polls yesterday. I put up several polls, including one on who's worse, Taylor Swift or the Beatles. Taylor Swift won unequivocally as being worse than the Beatles. It's debatable, but those are two pretty nasty ones. In any case, here are two polls that I'd like to cover. The final results are ill. The first one: by far the greatest number of terror attacks globally have been committed by Islamic extremists or Talmud extremists. 30,821 people answered the poll, right? So remember, Islamic extremists or Talmud extremists. Extremists who, implement Talmudic edicts. And the results are 44% said Islamic extremists and 56% said Talmudic extremists. So there are many more terror attacks around the world from Talmudic extremists. Now, a lot of the supporters of Palestine and the noble faith said, aha, Saad got screwed by his own poll. He thought that it would be otherwise. No, I like that you all band together to send the mob to answer the polls in the way that you do, because it shows the extent to which we have a problem. So 56% think Talmudic extremists. Now, there is a website that keeps track of terror attacks since 9/11 alone in nearly 70 countries, and 44,000 plus terror attacks have been ascribed to the noble Islamic faith. None have been ascribed to Talmudic extremists, but according to this poll, we have 56% of terror attacks are largely done by Talmudic extremists. The second one: the greater threat facing the West is Zionism. Now remember, Zionism is the idea that Jews should have their own land, very, very small land, probably the size of New Jersey, maybe less. Surrounding it is about 99.6% of land mass, and the Jewish land is about 0.4%, where there have been Jews on that land well before there were any, thousands of years before Islam existed, before other so-called indigenous people in the region existed. Jews were there. So that's all Zionism is. Jews should have their own autonomy, their own sovereignty, their own nation. So the question is, the greater threat facing the West, is it Zionism or is it Islam? And again, some folks with large followings who are not fans of the Jews asked their fans to come in and vote on this. And so 127,523 people voted, and 56% said Zionism was a greater threat to the West than Islam. 44% said that it was Islam. Okay, Islam has conquered 56 countries and the Palestinian territories. Zionism is a land that is the size of a small state in the United States, where 20% of the population are Arab Israelis. When I ask people, well, how do you arrive at the conclusion that Zionism is the greatest threat to the West? Usually the argument is it's a range of Jew-hating conspiracies. It's the Jews that control banking. It's the Jews that control our jobs. It's the politicians who are hoodwinked by the Israeli Zionist lobby, and therefore they pursue their interests. So effectively, Zionism, in an indirect way, is much, much more dangerous, according to those folks, than Islam is. And if you point to any specific, say, terror attacks or any conquests and so on, each of those conquests turns out to either be not have been done by Muslims. It was a false flag operation. It was really Jews who did it. And they say it. It's very clear. 9/11 was really Jews who did it. Or they'll say, to the extent that they'll admit that it was the noble faith that was the instigator of a particular terror attack or military conquest or colonial conquest or subjugation of millions of people, then they'll say, well, that's justified because, the Nakba, the tragedy, the catastrophe of 1948. So there is no historical evidence, no data that is as clear as the existence of gravity that could ever cause some of those folks to say, well, maybe there might be a problem on our end. It's always the Jews. Take care, everybody. Cheers.